successfully married off. Yeah, so we're officially empty nesters. Although I'm told they do come back from time to time.
They do.
The voice of experience. All right, well, we're going to have fun today in Jeremiah. We're going to take a look at the fall of Jerusalem. But first, let's get caught up on our current events. Kind of done a few weeks, and let's see what's going on, and we'll look at these through biblical eyes, see if we can figure out where we're going. Let's see, Dallas Morning News, October 11, Russia won't renew nuclear stockpile pact. Russia said Wednesday it had no intention of extending a 20-year-old deal with the U.S., helping to secure the nation's nuclear stockpiles, a move that comes amid growing isolationist streak in Kremlin policy. And what we've done in '92, in order to help them dismantle their nuclear arsenal, we have provided billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars was the trade-off. But now the deal's off, and that's right out of Ezekiel 38, War of Gog and Magog, which Russia is the lead player in an assault against Israel. So no surprise there. And continuing the conversation about women, the Boston State Court has ruled that the state must pay for inmate sex changes. Robert Koslik, well, he was convicted in 1990 of murdering his wife. While in prison, he decided he'd rather serve out the rest of his sentence as a woman, and they said, well, you know what, the 8th Amendment gives him the right to adequate medical care. The court decided it was a medical necessity, and so the taxpayer is helping to fund that. Well, I mean, God said in the beginning He made them man and woman. So, it's out on the East Coast. Let's see, riding over Quran photos, we know that. Grenade thrown into Kenyan church. In the last 100 years, more Christians have died by violence than in all the years of Christendom combined going back to Rome. In the last 100 years, the church is under severe persecution. When we read the letters of Paul, he talks about persecution and how it's coming. And Jesus indicated that was one of the things to look for. And we're somewhat isolated from all of that here in the United States. But our brethren around the world are going through serious trials and serious tribulations. That's one of those end time signs. Oh, let's see. Woman fatally stabbed. Police say an Irving man killed his 28-year-old girlfriend because after having sex with her, he later found out that she had AIDS. So as he was being arrested, his quote was, well, she deserved it. She killed me, so I killed her. What do we learn from Proverbs, first 6 chapters of Proverbs? She will reduce you to a loaf of bread, and we do have a loaf of bread winner somewhere in our stack this morning, I'm sure. Oh, the Iranian leader still committed to the actual destruction of Israel. What I thought was interesting when he spoke before the United Nations, he was comparing the history of Persia with Iran, with the history of Israel. And he said the history of Israel is insignificant compared with the long history of Iran. He said Israelis have only been around the region for 60 or 70 years, in contrast to the Iranians, whose civilization has existed for thousands of years. What's interesting about that particular region, especially Persia, remember in Daniel, when Daniel was praying, his last prayer in the book of Daniel, it took 3 weeks for him to get that penetration through to have his prayers answered when the angel came and spoke with him. And what did the angel say? It's the prince of the power of Persia. And there are demons and principalities that have assignments in different parts of the world. And the prince of power of Persia is a strong prince. It was, in fact, in that region of the world that you had the rise of Baal worship. Baal worship arose out of Babylon in that region and is still there today. And that's why the region is so difficult. You know, it's so difficult. Okay, well, this is interesting too. Yesterday's Dallas Morning News, the EU wins the Nobel Peace Prize, contributing to the advancement of peace, reconciliation, democracy, and human rights in Europe. And as we know, the European Union is the revived Roman Empire. When Daniel was having his vision, and he had that big statue of Nebuchadnezzar, and he said, Nebuchadnezzar, the head is you, right? You're the head. And then he talked about the other powers that would come after that. We had the Babylonian Empire, and we had the Persian Empire. The Greeks, we had the Romans, and then Rome, what happened to Rome? Rome split, right? Rome split. You had Eastern, Western, Constantinople, and Rome. And what did the split do? What did the legs do? They fought against each other. You know, they warred against each other, and that's true. All throughout the European history, there was nothing but fighting. And then at the very end, you have the revived European Union, which is represented by the toes. And so, on the biblical timeline, prophetic timeline of kingdoms, we're here at the very bottom. And so they win the Nobel Peace Prize because they're not fighting. That's kind of unique. It's kind of unique. But the EU is here to stay. It was prophetically given to us by Daniel, and we've seen that come to fruition. Okay, California, it is now official. It is now official. In Los Angeles, there are now more medical marijuana dispensaries than Starbucks Cafe. Isn't that just great?
Wow.
And although the feds have tried to crack down on those, the quote is here, no, people, there's no way we're going to stop selling this stuff because people here are desperate and there's nothing they can do. So that's how you just, well, they're desperate. And there's nothing else they can do but smoke marijuana. Well, that's just great. California is broke. Now they're broke and stoned.
It is a bellwether state.
Did they fall off into the sea at some point? Maybe that's the second Malachi. Okay, and nuns gaining ground. This, for the first time in our history, Protestants are no longer the majority. Okay, this is under our watch. In the United States of America, Protestants are no longer the majority. And this is from the Pew Research Center. And so we've decided we're going to do something about this. We've seen this coming for a while, and we had a deacons meeting over at the SMU campus about 3 weeks ago. And what was interesting about their demographics is that 9 out of 10 in the student population claim no religious affiliation whatsoever. None. Zero. And out of the 10% that do claim religious affiliation, the fastest growing group is Islam. So, what we've decided to do, and we ran a trial balloon this summer, is that as we're coming up on the holidays, you know, Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, if you're wanting to organize a group party in your home for your neighbors, your friends, those who are unsaved, if you're wanting to do that or we're planning to do that anyway, we will provide entertainment. You know, we'll bring first-class musicians into the home, have some type of Christmas something, sprinkle some Christians in there with you, and just help share the gospel. We did that this summer in the Lake Highlands area to tremendous success.
Area. We're just heathens there.
We
had it over at Miller
neighbor.
Cunningham's house.
When you say we, what do you mean?
Miller Cunningham's house. We had his sons, and his sons sang. And so there was just an invitation to everybody in his neighborhood. You know, come hear Miller's kids sing. And so they came and saw, and then we had about a dozen Park Cities people there. And there's been a lot of follow-up and a lot of response to that. People who would never darken the door of the church, but who realize, you know what, these people are fun. I would like to be around these people. And so we're going to be doing that because it's, you know, our model for many years has been build it and they will come. But I think we need to be more like Jesus and go to where they are. And there's some people who will never darken the doors of the church, but we can go to them. So we're being proactive, and that is in the works. It's going to happen. So, you know, talk to Miller, talk to me. If you're interested in just having a party with your neighbors or something, we'll help with that. Okay? We'll help with that.
You go all the way to Tucson?
Well, Southwest. We'll take the company plane. Okay, Middle East turmoil, we know all that. Oh, fraud blamed for retractions in biomedical journals. We know, and we've studied that. You know, you pick up, when I was looking at my daughter's science books, it was unbelievable the mistakes that were in there. And yet we feed our children this, and no wonder they are so easily drawn into heresy, because there's so much in there that's just absolutely not true. Retractions all the time. And, okay, and then we'll just stop. There's a lot more. We'll pick on that. Oh, no, two more. Researchers find people in Utah and the Bible Belt donate more. They donate more. People in the Bible Belt and people in Utah are more generous in their giving than anyone else. And no surprise there. Why? Because it's about the heart. You know, it's not so much about selfishness. It's about the heart. And then our loaf of bread winner this week is unique to this class because it was the Detroit police chief. The Detroit police chief, Ralph Godby, he stepped down Monday after a week of embarrassing revelation about a sexual relationship with a subordinate, forcing the city to search for a fifth leader in 4 years. And what's interesting about this was that Ralph Godby was hired after his predecessor was fired for having a relationship with Tootsie. He was brought in because of an adulterous affair with this woman. And as it turns out, Ralph, they find out, had an affair with the same woman. So she took out
Yeah, there's gotta be some. Yeah.
So there was plenty of leaven in her for 2 loaves to rise. So, unbelievable.
Did they have a picture of her?
The same woman. Oh, can a man take fire into his bosom and not be burned? No. All right, let's go to Jeremiah, and let's look. We're going to have some fun today with, well, not some fun. We're gonna look at this and look at some numbers and look at some prophetic, what is provable and what is not provable, and we're going to dispel some myths, some, I think, not correct teaching on the subject. Let's go to Jeremiah. I think we were in, let's see, 36, or 30, no, let's see, 34. Okay, we're in the scroll, we're burning the scroll, Jeremiah's in the dungeon, he's in the mucky mire. And you know that mucky mire was in the muck. The English translation is very kind about it. They put him in the latrine. You know, neck deep in the latrine. I mean, they didn't like this guy. So we're going to pick up in chapter 39. So we're at the fall of Jerusalem now, and let's track through this. It's self-explanatory. It's historical, and then we'll go to Josephus and we'll compare the two. Okay, fall of Jerusalem. In the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 10th month, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his army against Jerusalem, and they besieged it. And the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, the 9th day of the month, the city was broken up. All right. This happened on the 9th of Av, on the Jewish calendar, and on one of your handouts, we have everything that happened or has happened on the 9th of Av. The first 9th of Av incident was when the spies came back and gave a bad report. And then we have the destruction of the first temple, the second temple, Jerusalem plowed under, the Crusades, the Roman martyrs, the Spain expulsion, the Russian mobilization, the German liquidation. Everything happened on the 9th of Av. So this is a very important day in Jewish history, and they celebrate it to some extent by having weddings in that month as a symbol and a sign that, well, we will continue. We will continue on. And after 70 A.D., incorporated into the Jewish wedding ceremony is the breaking of glass. And if you've been to a Jewish ceremony, or I guess even watched Fiddler on the Roof, and there's the breaking of the glass, that symbolizes the crushing destruction of the temple on the 9th of Av. Okay, that's a remembrance of what happened on the 9th of Av in disobedience, and as you know, they feel very strongly about raising children because of the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. And they see that as a commandment and not just an instructive part of the Torah. So here we are again on the 9th of Av, and we're going to be coming back to the 9th of Av quite a bit throughout history. But what is fascinating about our text, and about the Babylonian text, and about the Josephus and the Egyptian histories, they all mesh together perfectly. The only difference is the Babylonian archives are one year off. But they all mesh with what happened here, and what I think is important historically is that there's so much detail on these dates, times, kings, people, places, so that this date is fixed very solidly in history. It really is. Okay, verse 3. And all the princes of the king of Babylon came in and sat in the middle gate, even Nergal-Shazzar, Samgar-Nebo, Sarashim, Rapsaris, Negal-Sharezer, Rabmag, and the residue of the princes of the king of Babylon. Okay, when they come, the middle gate. At the very beginning, what did Jeremiah warn them? These princes will come and they will sit in your gate. They'll be here in your gate. All right. Well, here they are. Verse 4. And it came to pass that when Zedekiah the king of Judah saw them, and all the men of war, then they fled and went forth out of the city by night, by way of the king's garden, by the gate between the two walls, and he went out the way of the plain. But the Chaldeans' army pursued after them, and overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho. And when they had taken him, they brought him to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to Riblah in the land of Hamath, where he gave judgment upon him. Then the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah in Riblah before his eyes. Also the king of Babylon slew all the nobles of Judah. Moreover, he put out Zedekiah's eyes and bound him with chains to carry him to Babylon. And the Chaldeans burned the king's house and the houses of the people with fire, and break down the walls of Jerusalem. Particularly stiff judgment, and it corresponds exactly with what both Jeremiah said and what Ezekiel said. What did Jeremiah say? Jeremiah said, you will be taken in chains to Babylon. You're going to Babylon. And what did Ezekiel say? You will never see Babylon. Well, with his eyes gouged out, he was taken to Babylon, although he never saw it, because he was blinded. Particularly harsh sentence, because the last vision in his remembrance is going to be his sons being slain before his eyes, and then blinded. Nebuchadnezzar's a tough guy. 8. And the Chaldeans burned the king's house and the houses of the people with fire, and break down the walls of Jerusalem. Then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive into Babylon the remnant of the people that remained in the city, and those that fell away, that fell to him with the rest of the people that remained. That Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, left of the poor of the people, which had nothing in the land of Judah, and gave them vineyards and fields at the same time. So this is the third and final wave that Nebuchadnezzar made of his raids, of his 3 raids onto Jerusalem. In the first wave, he had taken the artisans and the craftsmen. And we know the great building program that Nebuchadnezzar is famous for. A lot of that was put up with Jewish talent. And that's why he took them first. He wanted to build some type of monuments to his wife, who came from a hilly country. And so many of those remnants of his work are still standing today, because the brick itself has an oily content and it's almost impervious to wear. And during the Gulf War and our occupation of Iraq, we had a military base there in Old Babylon. That's how sturdy the buildings still are. 11. Now Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, gave charge concerning Jeremiah to Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, saying, take him and look well to him, and do him no harm, but do unto him even as he say shall unto thee. Exactly what the Lord had told Jeremiah in the very beginning. I will protect you. The evil that's coming upon the land of Jerusalem will not befall you. It will not befall you at the hands of the Babylonians. So Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, sent, and Nebuzaradan, Rapsaris, and Negal-Shazzar, Rabmag, and all the king of Babylon's princes, even they sent and took Jeremiah out of the court of the prison, and committed him unto Gedaliah the son of Acham, the son of Shaphan, that he should carry him home. So he dwelt among his people. So we'll stop here in the word. Let's go over to Josephus, Flavius Josephus. And this was penned in the 1st century, and at that time, before the burning of the libraries of Jerusalem, and before the burning of the libraries of Alexandria by Alexander the Great and all the other libraries that Alexander burned down, Josephus had access to quite a wealth of material, and so he put it together in multi-volumes. And we'll pick up here in chapter 8, section 2, with regard to the fall, and we'll see what the civil record indicates happened on that day. 2. Now the city was taken on the 9th day of the 4th month in the 11th year of the reign of Zedekiah. They were indeed only generals of the king of Babylon, to whom Nebuchadnezzar committed the care of the siege, for he abode himself in the city of Riblah. The names of these generals who ravaged and subdued Jerusalem, if anyone desired to know them, were these: Negral, Shazar, Sagernebo, Rapsaris, Sarshechem, Radramag. And when the city was taken about midnight, and the enemy's generals were entered into the temple, and when Zedekiah was sensible of it, he took his wives and his children and his captives and friends, and with them fled out of the city through the fortified ditch and through the desert. And when certain of the deserters had informed the Babylonians of this, at break of day they made haste to pursue Zedekiah, and overtook him not far from Jericho, and compassed him about. But for those friends and captains of Zedekiah who had fled out of the city with him, when they saw their enemies near him, they left him, and dispersed themselves, some one way and some another, and everyone resolved to save himself. So the enemy took Zedekiah alive, when he was deserted by all but a few, with his children and his wives, and brought him to the king. When he was come, Nebuchadnezzar began to call him a wicked wretch, a covenant breaker, the one that had forgotten his former words, when he promised to keep the country for him. He also reproached him for his ingratitude, that when he had received the kingdom from him, who had taken it from Jehoiachin and given it to him, he had made use of the power he gave him against him that gave it. But he said, God is great, who hateth that conduct of thine, and hath brought these into us. Very fascinating. We have Zedekiah, who had the prophet Jeremiah with him. Now remember, Ezekiel's already in Babylon, sending these same prophecies, and some of these prophecies are crossing each other. We also have Daniel, who's right now in Babylon. And it's interesting at this point that Nebuchadnezzar says that God has caused this to come upon you. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar is getting some introduction to Yahweh by Daniel and his friends at this point. So I think that's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar believes God and Zedekiah did not. And when he had used these words to Zedekiah, he commanded his sons and his friends to be slain, while Zedekiah and the rest of the captains looked on. And after which he put out the eyes of Zedekiah, bound him, and carried him to Babylon. And these things happened to him, that he should be caught and brought before the king of Babylon, and should speak to him face to face, and should see his eyes with his own eyes. And thus far did Jeremiah prophesy, but he was also made blind and brought to Babylon, but did not see it according to the prediction of Ezekiel. Okay, so Josephus comes to the same conclusion. Look, hey, they were both correct. They were both correct. 3. We have said thus much because it was sufficient to show the nature of God, to set you ignorant of it, that his various and acts made in different ways, and all events happen after a regular manner in their proper season, that it foretells what must come to pass. It's also sufficient to show the ignorance and incredulity of men, whereby they are not permitted to foresee anything that is future, and are without any guard exposed to calamities, so that it is impossible for them to avoid the experience of these calamities. And obviously this is a civil view, but we know from having studied Jeremiah, they had every opportunity to know exactly what was going to happen. They did not believe. Verse 4. And after this manner have the kings of David's race ended their lives, being in number 21 until the last king, who altogether reigned 514 years, 6 months and 10 days. of whom Saul was their first king, retained the government 20 years, though he was not of the same tribe as the rest. And now it was that the king of Babylon sent Nebuzaradan, the general of his army, to Jerusalem to pillage the temple, who had it also in command to burn it and the royal palace and to lay the city even to the ground and to transplant the people of Babylon. According to, he came to Jerusalem in the 11th year of King Zedekiah, pillaged the temple, carried out the vessels of God, both gold and silver, particularly the large laver which Solomon dedicated, as also the pillars of brass and the takers, the golden tablets and the candlesticks. And when he had carried these off, he set fire to the temple in the 5th month, the first day of the month, in the 11th year of the reign of Zedekiah, and in the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. He also burnt the palace over to the city. Now the temple was burnt 476 years, 6 months, and 10 days after it was built. So we're just going to look at these numbers, and we're going to pretend we're Hebrew mystics today. We're not, but we're going to look at what many believe, and I understand the framework, and we can do the math, but I think it proves the opposite of what is taught. So let's look at these numbers. And this book has been around, this rendering has been around since the 1st century. So we've had 1900 years for people to look at this and try to draw some meaning to it. So we'll look at it very briefly and see if we can come to a different conclusion. So we have the temple. And it was burned up, what, 470 years. And you have 6 months and 10 days. And that's where I come from. And what else did he chronicle? 1,062 years, 6 months, and 10 days. Let's see, 1,062, 6 months and 10 days, and that was from their slavery from Egypt. From the flood and destruction of the temple, the interval was 1,957 years. Okay, that's the flood. And then he adds the 6 months, 10 days. And then from the generation of Adam until this befell the temple, 3,513 years, 6 months, and 10 days. Okay. And what he has done here is what many have done. Obviously, he had access to records that we don't have. Early history books that we use in America, they show roughly the same time, that there'll be about 6,000 years of recorded history. So what happens here, and what the mystics believe, and what they teach, and I know some strong believers in this also, and I can't say it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I don't think that's the case. Let's let a little bit of predicate. Let's go to 2 Peter 3, and we'll crunch these numbers and we'll be done. 2 Peter 3, verse 8. 2 Peter 3:8. Well, let's go. Let's do all of this. Second epistle, beloved, I now write unto you, both which I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance, that you may be mindful of the words which were spoken before the holy prophets and the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days. Okay, last days. So he's making this reference to last days. But did the disciples believe they were in the last days? They did. The first century church, did they believe that they were in the last days? Okay, fine. So last days, the disciples, they said yeah. The church said yeah. Okay, let's figure it out. And saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. So from Adam, everything's really still the same. And we believe we're in the last days, but yet nothing seems to have changed. So what do we respond to this? Well, here's what Peter says. For this they willingly are ignorant of, by what the word of God, the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the waters and in the water, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. So they're ignorant about what? How the world was created, and you can see that in evolution. Well, it's just an ignorant theory that comes up out of that. Don't believe in the flood, although there's overwhelming evidence of the flood. 7. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, preserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Good. But, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. And the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And this is the premise, and this is also found in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Isaiah, when it talks about the 1,000-year millennial reign. And the prophets and Hebrews and I believe in a literal 6 days. I really believe the earth was created in 6 days. And I believe when Jesus says 1,000 years, and Isaiah says 1,000 years, and Peter says 1,000 years, I believe that's 1,000 years. That's the millennial reign. So here's why they believe they were in the last days. You take these numbers, and you can get to these numbers by going through the begats and looking at everybody's lifespan. Okay, this guy lived this year, David lived, and you add all those years together, the begats, and you come to this number. So if we have from Adam to the destruction of the temple, 3,513 days, and if that is the epicenter, from Adam to the 9th of Ab, and this is the point where they lost everything. The kingdom died. The Davidic line died. The prophets died. We're going to see a little later on, they all got their heads chopped off. Nebuchadnezzar chopped off their heads. They lost everything on this day. That this was the epicenter. And that from this point on, it's redemptive process. It's redemptive process. Okay. And the literal thought is, if one day is as 1,000, the 6 days of creation, would each represent 1,000 years. Okay? And so from Adam to Abraham, you have 2,000 years. From Abraham to Jesus, you have 2,000 years. And then from Jesus, 2,000 years. And on the 7th day, what did the Lord do? He rested. He rested. And our Messianic friends will tell us that the refreshing that Peter talked about in his sermon there at Pentecost, that refreshing, that times of refreshing, that was 1,000-year millennial reign. And so that the recorded history is going to go 7,000 years. And so they lock themselves in this kind of timeline, based on that. But what it doesn't incorporate is grace. Yeah, it's law. And we can do the numbers and say, well, yeah, I can see that. And if we look at these days here, and let's just double this. Now we're going to cross from Adam's time, we're going to cross over to AD. And when you do that, you always have to add a year, because we went from 1 BC to 1 AD. There was no 0, so you can't do that. Well, we did, but you're not supposed to. Okay. So we're going to add a day, and that comes out to 27. You're already past. You're already past your 7,000. Okay? And so if the disciples thought that they were in the latter days, it's because this midpoint had been crossed, to the end. And you're past that. You're already past the 7,000. And when you break down and convert from our Gregorian calendar to the Hebrew calendar, it comes out to 33 years extra on there. And what's just interesting about this is that how long was Jesus' ministry? Yeah, it was 33. It was 33 years, and we know that. We know it was 33 because he was 30 when he started his ministry. Born during the Feast of Tabernacles, crucified at Passover, and when you cycle through, counting the Passovers, it's 33 and 6 months. he walks into Jerusalem on what day in the month of Nisan? The Passover lamb was brought into the home on what day out of Exodus 12? On the 10th day. The 10th day the lamb was chosen. When Jesus walked in through the eastern gate on the 10th day, that was it. The lamb has been chosen. That's the lamb that's going to be slain. And so you kind of get your 10 days, and I think it's kind of interesting that all these are timed out of the 6 months and in the 10 days. But the ultimate issue is this: grace always wins. Grace wins. And we see in Jeremiah that the Lord gave them every possible opportunity to repent. And the timeline that was locked in stone was the 70 years. But he kept giving grace upon grace upon grace. And Jesus never said to crunch numbers like this. He never said to do that. What did he say? He gave us some definite signs. And there are 490 years total of prophecy. 490 total. 483 were fulfilled at the cross. There's 7 years left. In that 7 years, that is the tribulation. And that doesn't start until we have a covenant that allows the Hebrews to rebuild the Temple Mount. Everything revolves around the Temple Mount and the Jews. That's God's time clock. So I understand the argument, and I understand, the numbers, and we could do all kinds of things. We could invert these, say, well, from the flood to the destruction of the temple, and then we could go from the destruction of the second temple to the new time when they're going to be in Petra. And yeah, we can make a nice little chart, and we can probably write a best-selling book. I mean, it'd all be heresy. Because Jesus said, no one knows except the Father. No one knows. So grace still abounds. And if this was God's template, and we see in Peter that it is his will, and he's not slack as we would consider slack, but his desire is for all to come to repentance. So if you see a book, or you have a Messianic Jew or whoever, and say, oh, well, he's going to come in this year, well, you can put that in the category with the Mayan calendar. You really can. Nobody knows. Not even the mystic Hebrews. Well, we'll pick up in chapter 40 next week, and we'll see what happens after Jerusalem is fallen. It's gone. They're in Babylon. There are a few folks left, and we'll see what happens next.